owners, the boundaries, introduce project planning. Project planning. As I shared with you earlier, there's 5 phases of a project life cycle. And today we're going to talk about each of those phases and how they relate, say, to the various knowledge areas. Team, this is a high level at a glance I put together. It's a different way of depicting the various phases from the top left, initiation, going down to planning, execution, and closure. And what I like to do is show the monitoring and controlling not only during the execution phase, but you want to be that eye in the sky as a project manager, end to end, start to finish. But the other key aspect of this slide that I'd like to share with you is effort. What is the effort, say, in the bottom left of building a deck? And when you compare that effort, as we talked about earlier, to the effort of, say, an enterprise-wide example of a core network upgrade, that effort, say, in a global or a large enterprise banking company, all right, that effort is very, very high. It may take many months. It could, depending on time, budget, resources, etc. I've been involved in bank rollouts that took multiple years, quite frankly, before you go across the enterprise. So the point I want to share here, regardless of the effort, apply the same project management fundamental concepts and principles to achieve your desired successful outcome, regardless of if you're building a deck on one side of the spectrum or doing a global IT large initiative. So let's review the initiation phase. Okay, the initiation phase, it starts the formalization of authorizing to start a project. And, oh, by the way, if it's a somewhat complex, like the one I was just saying I've been involved in a global enterprise deployment, you may want to break it up into different phases, maybe different core functions. We're going to do the core network. We're going to do the remote locations. We're going to do headquarters, et cetera, et cetera. And in breaking it up, it could also help reduce potential risk. So the project charter, what we talked about earlier, okay, is created to help develop the process in terms of that statement of work we touched upon, the high-level requirements we talked about, what constraints, what risk, the stakeholders, things of that nature. When you look at the initiation phase, all right, you want to bring the team together to collaborate, okay? Because as a project manager, you only know so much. You want to rely on your project team. Think about the breadth and depth of the expertise and knowledge that you have assembled in conjunction, say, with the users that you're serving, the stakeholders that you're serving, the how and the what, okay? But what's also important, as I touched upon, beyond doing it on time within budget to the quality satisfaction, you want to make sure that they understand the value, the benefits, the return on investment, the earned value, the IRR, internal rate of return, the break even, things of that nature. Raising your conversation to be more of a consultant, obviously, beyond just a project manager. So practical considerations, you want to make sure you know the scope, you understand the scope, the stakeholders, the business case, for example, things of that nature. When you look at the initiation phase, Once you get your arms around that, that then transitions into the next phase, the project planning phase. And you start the planning phase because the timelines, the documents that are part of the initiation, they're completed. Everybody now is in the same page with you. Budget now is starting to be assigned, things to that nature. So what is project planning? It's the blueprint for you, the project manager. You want to have control. It's your rudder, if you will, as you journey around that project life cycle. Understand, you as a project manager, you have overall responsibility of the plan. But yet it's for everyone to understand the what, the how, the where of the project. Okay? It articulates the deliverables, the requirements, the schedule. Okay? And it breaks down the overall project into, say, smaller tasks where you're now forming the team. You're preparing the schedule. So I cannot emphasize enough. Good planning up front helps further downstream to minimize risk, additional budget that may be needed, issues, things of that nature. But good planning overall helps in time, cost, quality, change, risk, issues, and obviously staffing. So when you look at the project planning phase, team, some simple things to think about in terms of practical considerations. Create the plan. Look at the workflow, what I call swim lanes. And I have an example. I want to share that with you in terms of who does what, the actual role, the actual responsibility to do something, an activity of the project. Obviously, the budget. What tools are needed? What potential roadblocks? You want to hold, hopefully, a kickoff meeting to be the glue, to bring all the different various entities together as one. Set the proper expectations. And it's that 80-20 rule, 80% preparation, 20% the perspiration, the execution, if you will. You want to have a project kickoff. Could be virtual, could be in person, and it sets the tone for everyone. Okay? Everyone should be excited that they're part of your project. You want to have a solid agenda. You want to articulate what truly it is, what truly it isn't. Make sure everyone has that same vision of that desired outcome of the project. Some practical considerations: intro, a summary, the scope, who does what, the overall schedule, and how are we going to communicate? How are we going to work together? Maybe in subgroups, maybe in team groups. How am I going to work with, say, the stakeholders, et cetera, et cetera? So here's a nice at-a-glance, team, I wanted to share with you in terms of things to think about in preparing for a project kickoff. Before the meeting, what are some things to consider? During the meeting, what are some things to think about? And then subsequent after the meeting. So in the group chat, before we take a break, team, can you share in just a few simple... Now, team, let's transition into the execution phase. The execution phase, simply put, it occurs after the project plan, after the kickoff, things like that. And the PM communicates, you update the team. We're now getting things underway with the stakeholders, maybe the end users, depending on your project. Overall, you want to get the project off to a strong, effective, efficient start, going in the right direction. And the phrase I like to use here, team, you want to make sure everybody is in the right seat, on the right bus, going in the right direction. Okay? You're executing the plan now. So when you look at the approval, the plan, the team, the costs, everything now is going into motion. It goes into action. Some practical considerations here, team. You created the task, the workflows like we talked about. Everybody knows their role. You now communicate effectively, not only to the team, not only to the clients. Maybe the client is the end user, as an example, the stakeholders. And you want to ensure the project is ongoing meeting the time, the quality, some of the objectives, some of the KPIs, key performance indicators, all right? And people are spending and keeping the project on track as planned, okay, within the amount of resources per the budget. Excuse me. So, important consideration, a well-documented process enables execution to be that much easier. What a beautiful thing. So, if you were to look at summarizing some of the tasks within the execution, there's a lot of verbs necessary to direct and manage the work, to manage the knowledge, maybe to gather the deliverables, status, things of that nature. Are we on track with regard to variances of quality? Okay. Does everybody have the necessary training? Maybe have as someone said earlier, a mentor and a mentee. Maybe you need some formal training on a particular tool. For example, you want to manage the communications. What are we going to talk about in our communication? How often do I send it? In what medium do I send it to? Because a stakeholder is communicated differently than, say, your status meetings. But speaking of stakeholders, you want to make sure they're constantly in tune with you in terms of progress as you journey in that project life cycle. So let me ask you, team, and again, just a few words, project execution. What have been your experience? You did the initiation, you did the planning, etc. Now you're either in or completed the execution of the project. Team, in just a few words, how did it go? What worked? Was there any contract in place due to poor quality? Penalties, things of that nature. Quality was compromised. Yeah. Definition of done was, was not defined clearly. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, and that could go on and on and on, RS. Because as I opened up, if you remember, what's the definition of a project? A defined start and a defined end. It doesn't go on forever. Let's see. PP says if you add more contingencies in place, delays will be minimum. Yeah, and you want to be realistic on the contingencies, okay? JL goes on to say, not always it goes as planned. Teamwork, the spirit, the morale. Excellent point. But yet, good planning always aligns everyone on the common goal. Again, they're in the right seat, they're in the right bus, going in the right direction. I like that. Thank you. Let's maybe do one or two more. Ellie, our pet zoo is in its early stages. We're just brainstorming, bouncing ideas. Hopefully this class will provide me with great tips to get the project started. I truly hope so, Ellie, and I wish you and your team all the best. That sounds like a great, fun, and I'm sure memorable project that you'll always controlling. Let's take a moment and start this particular phase. So once the execution phase begins, you immediately, if not sooner, you go into monitoring, controlling. Okay, where in the planning phase you quote plan the work, the execution phase you work your plan, and now with the monitoring and controlling, you want to make sure everything is done as expected. If something unforeseen occurs, you take the corrective action. Okay, changes need to be made, either the work or in the plan. Change control, as I touched upon earlier, you want to make sure whatever changes, they are worthwhile and they add to your project versus hindering your project. And if you look at the various tasks of monitoring and controlling, again, you want to make sure there's an approval process of changes. You want to make sure the integration of changes is in place so that it positively, not negatively impacts your project. You want to control the schedule. You want to control the costs. You want to make sure you're within the variances of quality as expected. Okay? Because a lot of times, many of you indicated you're now crunch time. You're coming toward the end. And a lot of times, sad to say, quality is sacrificed to meet a particular schedule, a particular deadline. You want to monitor communication, the risk. You want to make sure you understand. Can you avoid it? Do you accept it? Can you alter it? Or can you transfer it, say, to some other entity to enable you as the project manager to continue the project in that life cycle journey? And then obviously the stakeholders, make sure they're in sync with you. So you look at the various phases, possible variances that may be need to be improved of some sort throughout that whole life cycle of the project. So practical considerations here, team, I just shared a few in terms of verification of the scope, of the schedule, of the cost, of the quality. You want to make sure you're reporting status on a regular, accurate, complete, and to those that need to know. Okay? You want to control risk, as I touched upon. But the other thing that some of you indicated in the group chat, when you look at suppliers, third party, contract administration, are they meeting the contractual requirements set forth way back when? And if they're not, there's got to be accountability. There's got to be potential penalties of some sort. And then last but not least, the project closure. The project closure, okay? The last key phase, okay? And it's in place to formally close, complete all the necessary activities, documents, contractual obligations. It could be formal in terms of in writing, and it's according to the terms of the contract, maybe within that supplier that some of you indicated, or within the customer that you and your team is serving. So you want to make sure in the project closure phase, you obtain acceptance, you do a post-review, excuse me, you want to look at lessons learned. How can we do better the next time based on the lessons learned this time? You want to apply any updates, say, to the organizational process assets. You want to terminate, hopefully in good standings, those contractual type of agreements. And eventually you need to release, whether it be equipment that was used, people, they go on to different other different projects, things to that nature. So when you look at the project closure, hopefully everything is now completed. Did we achieve the goal beyond time, budget, and quality? Did we solve, quote, the initial problem, the initial opportunity to take advantage of? How well did we perform as a team? Was everything done? Do we still have budget left? So the practical key takeaway consideration. This phase also helps to achieve future project success. Not only for you in a future project that you're involved in, but share it with your colleagues so that they are that much better based on your learned lessons. So here's a question, team. I value your thoughts. Let's say, for example, we finished on time. It was under budget. We delivered the functionality and the quality. But the project was deemed a failure. Now think about that question. Here's the question. Can you share an example on what could have caused this? Team, I value your experience. You did time, budget, and quality, but for whatever real something I want to share with you as a simple template example. Consider doing what I call a project audit. Value beyond cost, time, quality. You report on actual versus what the plan was. Okay, and this is a simple example. The project cost, actual versus planned. Okay, what is the internal rate of return, net present value, the payback period? Hopefully, the actual across the board was improved to the planned of the project toward the beginning. Something to think about if you don't do some type of audit. Okay? Something to think about. So here's the punchline. I truly hope all of you, more often than not, pop champagne during the closeout versus drowning your sorrows with a bartender. Okay? So I truly hope that's the case. Popping champagne. So, can you share a few words of your experience on the project closure? What I mean by this, what lesson learned would you improve upon? What lesson learned would you improve upon based on your experience of, say, a previous or